to September in Carraggio. I'm just trying to think, yeah, it's our final month or final quarter talking about people. And it's interesting talking to our Victorian members last Friday, and all the boards ran in Melbourne last Friday, as much off-site, not on-site, all due to Chairman Daniel, but anyway, that's another conversation for another day. But we're back in Sydney, and it's the last part of our series talking about people. And we've been recommended to what we think is one of Australia's best person in HR, and I think for all of you running a business today, I think HR is probably the number one thing that we're all thinking about. It was interesting coming out of Melbourne that most of the businesses are travelling on going okay, contrary much to Channel 9's views, but they're travelling on okay. And I think it seems to be the sentiment in Sydney as well. There are some challenges around, but at the end of the day, everyone seems to be relatively okay. The thing that's not okay seems to be entrepreneurs, the people that own the businesses, the people that are carrying the shoulders at the end of the day, and to a large degree have the responsibilities, not only just of running the business, but the HR responsibilities. And I think today more than ever, it's resting on our shoulders. And it's one of the things we probably think about more than anything else. So just before I continue, you'll all be happy to know that this is all now all guest speakers are recorded and go onto the member portal. So that's one camera. And for those members that are not here today and are zooming in, these presentations from this month can also be zoomed in as well. So that's why the idea of the two cameras. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Trudy MacDonald is a business leader, award-winning speaker, and a human resource professional, enabling business success. Currently, Trudy is the founder, managing director of Talentcode HR, and is passionate about improving the performance of your business by creating high-performance teams, company culture, and facilitating leadership capabilities and working with owners at the end of the day. One of the most common challenges facing is creating a sustainable culture of accountability that allows the business to deliver on its strategic objectives and business as usual. Wow, that's a good one. By creating role clarity, assigning purpose, ownership, settling clear expectations of what success looks like, leaders can create an engaged and motivated culture. More recently, a number of businesses are needing to redefine, there we go, sorry, my apologies, their purpose within the business, support their teams, establish clear expectations around performance measures as a way to determining individual success and contribution to the overall business growth. Key takeaways, and I'm sure Trudy's going to have plenty of them, but anyway, key ones. How to define business greatness at a company level, a team level, and an individual level. How to engage people so there is clarity regarding their roles and expected outcomes. How to rethink traditional performance reviews to avoid common pitfalls. And finally, how to have effective accountability conversations that inspire, engage, and motivate individuals. All in a day's work, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, Trudy MacDonald.
Thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here, everybody. I just spoke to another group of CEOs earlier this morning, and I started the session by asking them, what are your biggest issues at the moment? To reflect on Richard's message, for many of them it was actually themselves. So I was hearing a few key things. Number one is I've lost my mojo, I've lost my motivation, and for a number of them, they're actually sharing, I'm actually questioning my leadership capabilities. So if any of you are feeling even a glimmer of that at the moment, the first thing I want you to recognise is it's pretty normal right now amongst leaders. What I'm really passionate about is working with leaders to help them take business performance to the next level. So my objective today is to share with you some really practical tools and takeaways that you can take back to your business and hopefully help yourself as well in terms of regaining your mojo and your passion about what you can do with your organisations. So one of the most common challenges I hear from leaders is, how do I build this culture of accountability and how do I really keep my team aligned around where we're going? in this COVID environment, and I dare not say post-COVID environment because I don't think we're there yet, there's a number of things that have really changed the way leaders need to look at their teams. The first is, I think we all went into this thinking it's a sprint, but now we've realised it's a marathon. So how do we take teams and ourselves, who are in many cases are exhausted, we're burnt out, and actually keep the momentum going within our businesses? So there's two angles that I'm going to approach this topic from. The first is, how do we embed the disciplines of accountability into our organisations so that people know what accountability looks like? And there's a broader objective I'd like you to think about here, and it's taking accountability away from being just the responsibility of the leader or the manager to actually creating a culture of accountability where teams and individuals are holding each other accountable, because that takes a whole lot of pressure off ourselves. The second perspective that I'm going to tackle this from is, how do we create an environment so that people want to be motivated? So we've got two aspects here. What are the disciplines? And the second is, what's the motivational aspect here, and what's the environment? If you can get those two pieces right, you're going to set yourself up to really flourish into the future. So with that context, you'll have access to all of these slides, so feel free to take notes however you like. But what I'd like to start off with is just to open up your thinking a little bit to a broader framework. So if I could have you all imagine for a moment that your organisations are represented by a sphere, and that sphere has positive forward momentum, ultimately rolling towards what your vision for success is. Now, if you were to cut an axis through this sphere and plot the current performance and productivity of everybody who works in your business along that axis, it'd be interesting for you to think about that as a distribution. Now, let me help you with a few definitions here. So your great people, think about the people whose productivity and performance exceeds your expectations, and behaviourally, they're enhancing your culture. They're actually taking it to the next level into the future. Your good people, their productivity and performance is what you would expect, and behaviourally, they're generally behaving in line with the culture. And your poor people, and I'm being a little polite here because you might have other words for them, their productivity and performance is sometimes inconsistent, and or behaviourally, they're actually diminishing your culture. They might be sucking the life out of the room sometimes in some cases. Have a think about what that distribution looks like. So some of you may be thinking, I've got a fairly normalised distribution. Some of you may be thinking we're skewed towards great right now, and some of you may be skewed towards poor. And in fact, some of you might have a bimodal distribution that looks a little bit like this. Take a choice of those key distributions, and let's just get a bit of a show of hands around the room. Show of hands if you feel that your distribution right now today is skewed towards great. Show of hands. Okay, about half of you. Who's got a fairly normalised distribution? Okay, is anybody skewed towards poor? Yeah, okay, thank you for being honest around that. Okay, it doesn't matter what your distribution is, but this is the key message I'd like you to take away. If at any point in time your distribution is normalised, as we can see here, this is what it means practically. It means that your average level of performance as an organisation is good. So your customers on average have a good but not a great experience with your business. And likewise, your team members, when they come to work and they engage with each other, they're having a good experience on average but not a great experience. You may be feeling the same way as well. Maybe on an average day, you have a good day but you're not having a great day. Now, this has really big implications for how people feel, their motivation, their engagement, but also how well your business is performing. Now, if we go back to the analogy of the sphere here, if this is what your distribution looks like, your centre of gravity on this sphere that represents your business that's trying to roll forward is actually right in the middle. So here's the first question. What happens to your positive forward momentum if your centre of gravity is right in the middle? Yeah, you don't go anywhere, you stop. And in fact, in this environment, I'd make the case that if you've stopped, you're actually going backwards because the pace of change is so significant. So this is leadership challenge number one that you have. How do you shift your distribution so that it's skewed towards great? Now, if you've got your distribution skewed towards great, your centre of gravity is now on the front side of this sphere. So this is good. Now we've got a sphere that's rolling forward. I'm a bit of a realist. You can see there's still some poor people there. But what happens when the norm is to be towards great? What happens to those poor people, do you reckon? One of two things. You either sack them, yeah. They either fall off the end of the sphere because they don't keep up. So they self-select out, or they actually get sucked up in the momentum, because that's the cool place to be. That's where the energy is over there. So once we get to this point, you haven't made it, unfortunately. In fact, your problems have just begun, because here's what happens. Your sphere actually does roll forward. And this is a good thing. And talking to Richard, he mentioned that for Coraggio members, most businesses are doing pretty well right now. Your spheres have actually rolled forward. That's fantastic. But now you've got a bigger challenge, and the challenge is this. How do you keep the momentum going? How do you keep your people up with the pace of change that your organisation is moving at? And or your customers are going to have expectations around where you need to be. How do you keep your people moving? Because if your people stand still, and this includes yourself as leaders, if you stand still, what will happen is your great people will relatively coming back is the key point there we are. Your great people will relatively slip back to being good, and your good people are going to relatively slip back to being poor. So this is the second challenge that you have. How do you start to create a culture whereby we never stand still? In fact, we're continuously changing, and this applies to every single person in your organisation. Now, let's take a big step back here, because the underlying challenge I find with most leaders is when I talk through this analogy, the question I usually get is, I don't even know what great looks like. And this is problematic, isn't it? So how can we expect our teams and our organisations to be great when we, as the leaders of these organisations, aren't even clear on what this looks like? So what I'd like you to do right now is just take 1 minute, turn to the person next to you, maintaining appropriate social distancing, and just have a quick chat around what this concept looks like for you and what's going through your head right now. Off you go, 1 minute. All right, let's bring it back in, everybody, please. A very big concept and very little time to talk about it. All right, I would love to hear from just 2 people in the audience. Sounds like I've opened up a can of worms, haven't I? Okay, let's bring it back, everybody, please. Thank you. All right, can I hear for just 2 people in the audience one of the themes that's running through your head right now? I'm not going to pass the microphone over, but big loud voice. Thank you.
Easy to identify great performers.
Yes.
But what about the great performers who aren't good culturally?
Yeah, good.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so how do you deal with the great performers who aren't great culturally? And I think that the overriding question here to ask yourself is, how do you actually define performance within your organisation? So a lot of businesses will define performance superficially as getting the results. But if you reframe that great is a combination of both what you do and how you do it, now straight away you start to get a bit of a picture in your mind around what great looks like. Really good question. All right, one more comment from somebody. Yes, thank you.
I find great staff help you as a leader or a manager to change what you do.
Yes, absolutely. And that's such an important point. We're going to talk about that shortly, because in order for you to be great, you know intuitively you've got to surround yourself with great people. Otherwise you get sucked down into the business. All right, so with that framing, what I'd now like to do is take you on a journey around how we can achieve this, how we can maintain the momentum in our business and keep people going on that journey with us. Not surprisingly, it starts with all of you. So Jim Collins, who's the author of Good to Great, he has a concept referred to as level 5 leadership, you may have heard of. And what level 5 leaders do, which are the most established leaders, is when things aren't working around them, they don't look out the window and look for excuses, they hold up the mirror. So today's all about holding up the mirror and looking at ourselves and asking ourselves, what can we do differently as leaders to achieve this outcome? All right, so the starting point here, as mentioned earlier, is actually being able to define greatness for your business. And in every crisis, there's always a silver lining and there's always an opportunity. So right now, what I'm seeing the best businesses do is actually reimagining their businesses and redefining what greatness looks like. So a framework for thinking about this is asking yourself, to what extent has my industry been disrupted? To what extent has my business been disrupted? And based on that, what are the opportunities for change? So globally, there's 3 key themes that are starting to emerge from high-performing businesses right now. The first is that leading organisations are accelerating their product development and their services. They're understanding their customers deeply, they're understanding the mindset and the shifting mindset of their customers, and they're fast-tracking development. The second theme is really focusing on the customer and understanding how do we innovate, because without our customers we don't have a business, but the landscape is changing in terms of what our customers are looking for. How do we innovate and how do we do that really, really quickly? And the third is, how do we completely disrupt the way we've traditionally done business, particularly in organisations that are quite hierarchical? So let me share a story with you from an Adelaide-based business. They're a software business, they distribute their products globally. Coming into COVID, they had their 3-year strategic plan, and one of the key initiatives on their strategic plan was to take their customer care program and over the next 18 months, turn that into a digital solution that would enable them to scale it across their customers globally. Despite putting that strategic plan straight into the bottom drawer for a few weeks, they then pulled it out and the CEO dusted it off and said, you know what, we're going to focus on just one big thing because I reckon now is the right time. We're going to get this initiative underway. They had planned to do it in 18 months. The CEO looked at this and this was the financial situation. When he started the initiative, their existing service was delivering $70,000 of revenue to the business a year. Bugger all in the scheme of things. He went to market after 5 weeks. Not 18 months, 5 weeks, with a $3 million reoccurring revenue stream. This is what he did. Fascinating, right? But this is what he did. And these were the key lessons which really relate to these points. Number 1, he broke apart his organisational hierarchy. And what he did is he selected the best people, regardless of which division they sat in, regardless of how junior they were in the organisation. He plucked the best talent, he rallied them around a very distinct outcome, and he removed all the barriers and let them go. That was the first thing. He broke apart his structure. The second thing he did is he said to his team, we're not going to over-consult. Through over-consultation, they would have involved many, many more people, including the customers. They didn't over-consult, and subsequently, they cut right through to the deliverable. And the third lesson he shared with me was, I gave my team permission to not aim for perfection. Perfection is the enemy of actually getting things done. You think about how much effort it takes to deliver a perfect outcome versus how much effort it takes to deliver a good outcome. The incremental effort often doesn't give you a return on investment. So there's an example of where organisations have pivoted quickly, but what they're doing is starting to reimagine how to operate as a business culturally, but also what they can do in terms of outcomes. So there's a powerful McKinsey model that might prompt some thinking for you as you take this opportunity to redefine greatness. And you can see that there's 3 elements to this. The first is question, what is our purpose as an organisation? What are the opportunities that have been created? And does this actually shift why we exist and the value that we're creating? The second one is, what's our culture? How are we going to behave? And what have we learnt through this period of disruption and disjointed work arrangements? What have we learnt that we can actually take into the future as part of our culture and our way of working? And then finally, where do we sit in the value chain? What's really interesting, and I remember talking to a client of mine about a year ago. I was sitting down, I was asking him about his strategic plan for the year ahead. And when I asked him that on that particular day, he was really quite perplexed because he had just been out and spoken to his biggest customers. And this is what he had heard from them. He was hearing, within your industry, you are our number one supplier, but we're really unhappy with you. And he was just mulling over that, thinking, you know, what's actually underpinning this? But this is actually what the customers were saying. And I think this is really relevant for all of us to think about right now. As a customer, I have many different experiences with different suppliers across different industries, and I have an expectation of what great looks like. You might be the best within your industry, but you're a long way from meeting my expectation as a customer. And in that instance, they were talking specifically about the ability to get access to reports and data and technology and the value that was being delivered to them from this particular organisation. So one thing you may want to consider doing is going to your top customers and asking them, who is your best supplier? Across all the suppliers that you work with, who is your best supplier and why are they so good? Because that's going to give you more insights around where you may need to play in the value chain rather than just thinking within your industry. Beyond that, you can see there's a whole range of other things, but this is really pertinent to our motivation as leaders. One of the things to think about here when we start to talk about how we operate is how do we make decisions and what decisions are we making? What I'm seeing thematically across the board is leaders right now are being sucked into transactional decisions, operational decisions, because we've had to roll up our sleeves and we're supporting the team. But when we're involved in day-to-day decisions, what are we not doing? Yeah, we're not focusing on the future, we're not making the strategic decisions. So straight away, we're not actually leading anymore. And sometimes this just happens. So if any of you feel as though you're on the treadmill at the moment, this is probably what's happening. You're probably doing other people's jobs. Now, why is that happening? Why are the transactional decisions not happening down in the heart of the organisation? It's usually because of one or two reasons. Either number one, we've let a whole lot of people go and it's just all hands on deck. Or secondly, we haven't given them permission to do it. So how do we be really definitive around what it means to be great behaviourally? I want you to make decisions. I want to empower you. And thirdly, maybe they don't feel safe making decisions. And this is the concept of psychological safety. Do they feel safe making decisions and failing because of how we possibly respond when they do fail and they do make mistakes? So there's some really important points there. How do we learn as an organisation? How do we continue to grow? How do we upskill our managers and our leaders to be leading people in what is becoming the new norm? Disjointed, disrupted workforces, remote workforces. How do I have performance conversations? How do I motivate them? How do I get to know them? Managers don't know how to do this. We need to be giving them the skills to do that. There's a whole range of other concepts there. You can have access to the notes afterwards. So with this concept, step number one for you as leaders is how do we define greatness? Because then we've got the opportunity to actually cascade this down through the organisation. And that's the framework for holding up the mirror to ourselves and asking ourselves, what does great look like for my role? But what does great look like for everybody else's role? Because in the absence of being able to provide clarity around that, we've got no chance of our team being great. So that's step number one. It's useful once you've done that to actually think about how you need to execute and how you need to deliver on greatness. And a framework for thinking about this is you've got your vision, mission and values. You've got your strategic plan, which often looks out about 3 years. And then you cascade that down to an annual plan. But within that, it's useful to separate your strategic priorities from your business as usual. And if I can just use a few analogies here that might bring it to life. If you can think about the concept of a whirlwind, and the whirlwind just sucks up everything that you do every single day. And within that whirlwind, within that chaos, you're having to make decisions. What do I prioritise? What do I deprioritise? And your team is feeling exactly the same. But within that whirlwind, you're going to have some really important things that you need to deliver on. And you might want to call them rocks. You might want to call them wigs. A wig would stand for a wildly important goal. And what we need to do is we need to separate those things out from the whirlwind, because these are the things that are actually going to take our business forward. So what I'm hearing from a lot of leaders right now is, I'm exhausted, I'm working long hours, I'm caught up in this whirlwind, I can't see a way out of it, and we're not actually delivering on anything that's going to take us forward, because right now we're just holding still, and it's exhausting, and your teams are exhausted as well. So if we think about separating out the kind of work that we do, it's useful to think about that whirlwind or your business as usual as evolutionary change. And when I talk about evolutionary change, this is the continuous improvement. It's the slow, steady change. But here's the problem. If we only focus on the evolutionary change, what you get is the blue line down the bottom. You get slow, steady incremental growth. But let's go back to the sphere for a moment. That sphere isn't going to turn fast enough. The momentum is not going to be behind it if we just focus on this. So what we're looking for now is separation of our strategic initiatives, the game changers that are actually going to take us forward, because these are the step changes. This is a revolutionary change that's actually going to get us to the next level. So the $1 million question is, if great for your business is a combination of delivering on business as usual, being able to operate effectively within the whirlwind, and pulling out these rocks and being able to deliver on them as well, how do we actually set ourselves up for success? And this is the number one challenge I hear from leaders. Okay, I've got the plan, I know what I need to do. We just can't execute because we keep getting sucked into business as usual. So another useful analogy here is if you can imagine that all the time that you and every member of your team has to do your jobs every day is represented by a bucket. And every day we make a choice what goes into that bucket. We can put sand into the bucket, and that's all the busy reacting work. We can put gravel into the bucket, and that's usually what's on our to-do list. Now let's be honest with ourselves. What do we focus on our to-do list? We do the easy stuff. It feels really good to tick it off, yeah. Then what do? Then we do the urgent things. The deadline's been looming, and that's the thing I've been procrastinating on, but now the deadline's here and I need to do it. We do the things that we enjoy doing, and human nature for most of us is we defer the big, hard things. So they're the rocks. And what tends to happen is there's not enough room in the bucket for the rocks. Can anybody relate to that? So when do those rocks get done? Of an evening, on the weekend, tomorrow never comes, or they just don't get done. And this is the theme I see with most organisations. So job number one for us as leaders, we need to be able to help everybody identify what their rocks are. Now, here's my first controversial statement from an HR perspective. If you've got job descriptions in your organisation, who's got them? Okay, throw them in the bin. Because if we're now talking about a sphere that's rolling forward, if we're talking about keeping people up with the pace of change, that job description that you wrote 5 years ago, that's not going to help anybody. So what I strongly advocate for your consideration is let's create something that's nimble, that's agile, that's meaningful. When we went into COVID, my business got hit pretty hard. Once I pulled myself up off the floor and stopped rocking in the corner, what I did pretty quickly is I created a go-forward plan for my team, and it had 4 key priorities. And this is what I did. I said to my team, if you are doing anything on a day-to-day basis that does not link to these 4 priorities, I give you permission to stop doing it immediately. What I was doing is I was redefining the rocks for everybody, but alongside that, I'm giving them permission to stop doing things that's filling up time in their bucket. And sure enough, it was a restart for everybody. It was a re-energizer. I've got permission to stop doing that, and I'm going to focus on the things that matter. Imagine if you were doing that with your team on a regular basis. We're pivoting, we're being agile, we're being nimble. This is where we need to focus. Let's put all our energy there. Exceptionally powerful, exceptionally motivating. So it all needs to fit in the bucket at the end of the day. The key to doing this is how do we reduce the sand and the gravel, and how do we get really focused around what these rocks are? So here's an exercise for you to think about. An exercise for you to think about right now, but a tool that you can use with your team to really start to bring this to life. I'd like you to reflect on the last 6 months, and I'd like you to ask yourself, what's the great work that I've done in the last 6 months? This is work that's helped take your organisation forward. I then want you to ask yourself, what's the good work that I've done in the last 6 months? This is work that's adding value today. It's the day-to-day business as usual. And then it gets really interesting. Start to ask yourself, what's the poor work that you're doing? Now, the definition of poor work is not work that doesn't need to be done for the business, but rather you are not adding unique value by doing it. It may be somebody else's job, ideally. It may be inefficient. It may be something that you don't need to be doing anymore. That's the poor work. It's work that's filling up time or space in your bucket. And then the other really interesting question is what's missing? What should I be doing to be great moving forward to take this organisation forward? So jump into your small groups again. I'm only going to give you 1 minute. This is going to be really, really hard. What I'd like you to do is focus on the poor work and the missing work. What's one thing you could stop doing? But what's one really important thing that you could be doing as a leader right now to help keep the momentum in your business? You've got 1 minute. Off you go. All right, let's bring it back, everybody. Thank you. Can I please hear from 2 people? Just one thing that you've identified that's missing from your role right now that you'd like to be doing or you should be doing. Who'd like to volunteer one thing? Thank you.
Strategic thought.
Strategic thinking. Yeah, wonderful. And often in our buckets, there's just not enough mind space. Yeah, so sometimes, and Richard had a great tip earlier, he gets up at 4 o'clock every morning. That in itself sounds like hard work. And he sits under the tree for an hour. And that's his time to actually think. So I think there's something really powerful in that around giving ourselves permission to actually stop and think and operate more strategically, because it's actually what great looks like. It's not the guilt that comes with that. It's actually, this is part of my job. Good, thank you. All right, one other thing. Recruitment, yes, absolutely. And that may be stopping you from going forward if you can't get those critical hires. Beautiful, thank you. So this particular exercise is really thought-provoking, but here's how you could bring it to life. Imagine if you sat down with your entire leadership team and everybody did some pre-work on their own role and came to the table prepared to have a very open, vulnerable conversation around what the great work is they've been doing. And for some of them, they might go, you know what, I haven't been doing any great work, but that's okay. There's no judgment. What's the good work I've been doing? What's the poor work I've been doing? This opens up a really powerful conversation around how do we delegate this down? How do we start to upskill other people? How do we outsource this? How do we just stop doing it? How do we automate it? Because there's only so much space in our bucket. And then you have a really inspiring, motivating conversation around what's missing. And this needs to be aligned to your strategy. So this is why we start with strategy. What does great look like for the business? Let's get the leadership team aligned around that. The outcome of that discussion should be everybody's aligned, everybody's clear on what everybody's doing, and you've got the foundations of a high-performance team right there. And now you can start to cascade this down. Even in a pre-COVID environment, I've been doing this for years with my team every 90 days. We don't have job descriptions. We have the outcomes of these conversations. Once we've identified our rocks, we then be really clear on what the measures of success are. How do we know if we've done a great job? That replaces our job descriptions. It's nimble, it's agile, it's relevant, everybody's aligned. All right, that's your next tip. There's something that's really important as we go through this whole accountability piece, and the key message I'd like you to take away from this is accountability is not punishment. Accountability actually motivates people if it's done well. So here's the concept, and this is what I'd like you to think about. Think about a goal that you've worked towards in the last 6 months. It might have been a personal goal, you might have been renovating, painting the fence, it might have been a work-related goal. just reflect for a moment, how did you feel during that period when you were working towards that goal? Share some thoughts with me. How did you feel?
Anxious about getting to that goal?
Yeah. So it's not always fun and games. It can be a little nerve-wracking sometimes. It can be a little bit stressful. Good. Thank you.
I think it feels good that you're actually on the path.
Yes.
I know when I actually get off my path and get on the path.
Yes. It feels good, and generally it does feel good. It's not to say it's without its barriers and its bumps. However, when you wake up in the morning, you've got a reason to get out of bed. You've got some purpose. You've got your mojo. Can everybody relate to that? Having goals are good things. Now, let's fast track. You've achieved the goal. How do you feel?
Great.
You feel great. For how long? Not very long. It might be a matter of hours. It might be a matter of days. And then down we come. So human nature, what do we want to do? We set the next goal. We set the next goal. We all know this is our basic psychology. This is what motivates us as human beings. Now, let's take that concept into the workplace. If we're working with our teams to let them know what it means to succeed, and here are some goals that you can work towards, they get all of those emotions. They feel good. They're not dragging themselves to work thinking, oh, it's another day at work, I'm on the treadmill again. Rather, they're working towards meaningful goals. This enables them to self-recognise, but it also gives you and the rest of the team the opportunity to call out successes. And that's so important as a foundation for a highly motivated workforce that will be accountable. So setting goals for people is a good thing. Now, if that goal is too small, it actually doesn't have the same effect. It's demotivating, in fact. And it's a little analogous to, for all of us, if you've stagnated at any point in your career, just think about a time when you might have stagnated. Might only have been for a day or two, but you've stagnated. How do you feel? It's a bit hard to get out of bed, isn't it? No purpose. It's a drag. Think about how many people in your team today have stagnated because they don't have meaningful goals. They're not learning. They're not developing. Maybe they've been doing the same thing for a long time. And that's okay if it's the same job, but are they actually being stretched or have they stagnated? Because if they're stagnated, they ain't going to be great. I can guarantee it. The mindset's not there. So with that, we want goals that are just right. If those goals are too much of a stretch, they can actually feel quite anxiety provoking. And if I can use the analogy of an elastic band. So if your team member's holding to one end of a bit of elastic and you've got the other end, what you want to do is just stretch that enough so that if they fall into trouble, they'll just rebound. You bring them a little closer, you help them out again, and then you step away and you stretch that band a bit more. But if you stretch that band too much, what's going to happen to the elastic band? Snap, and you've lost them. They've lost their confidence, they're demotivated. So being really clear around setting the right type of goals is actually really motivating for people. So in all of that, this is what I've observed in the last 6 months from leaders. What's been happening is they've been challenging their teams because we're in COVID and we've got to survive and we're going to thrive and all of those things. So we've all had the pressure on ourselves. But then what started to happen in the last few months is there's been this emergence of negative, destructive behaviours because we're exhausted. And what we're seeing in our business is an increase in bullying and harassment claims. And I'm having leaders saying, my team, they're at each other, they're misaligned, we're having all these problems that we never used to happen. And what leaders are recognising is that, you know what, we're falling down here. We're over it, we're tired, I've got a short fuse, it's becoming stressful. Can anybody relate to that in their business? Yeah. So the natural response for many leaders is this, you know what, we're just going to pull back a little bit. We're going to take the pressure off. We need you to slow down a little bit. Very normal, but it's the worst thing you can do. Because this is what happens. As soon as we take the pressure off, we start to go back to good. We go back to average. We go back to mediocre. And I tell you what, if you stick around there for too long, it's really hard to get them going again. So what we actually need to do is increase the level of support that we're providing. So what I'm going to share with you now is an accountability cadence that not only maintains that healthy level of pressure, not too much pressure, but a healthy level of pressure, but also lifts the level of support within your environment. And what I'm talking about here is a culture that's supportive, not a support initiative, but a culture that's supportive. And this is what it looks like. The first thing I'd like you to think about is this concept of creating an accountability cadence. Is anybody watching Tour de France at the moment? Yeah? So if there's any cyclists in the room, you know what the term cadence means. It's just the round and around and around of the wheels, and boy, are they going round and around. So what we're looking for is a cadence within our organisation, a repeatable rhythm that we just do over and over again because we know it works. Now, my next controversial statement for you is not only should you throw away your job descriptions, but get rid of those annual performance reviews as well, because they're absolutely useless. Who's got one of those in their business? Yeah. Do you love it? No. I never found anyone who loves it, because this is what happens. Number one, it's a long time between conversations. Number two, we often whack a big rating on somebody and they walk out going, I'm a 3. They tell me I'm good, but I'm a 3. Gee whiz. I'm now motivated to be great. Of course you're not. It's miserable. And then we set a development plan that goes out a year, and guess what? Within a week it's in the bottom drawer and we've forgotten about it and nothing happens. No one's developing me. This is the kind of thing that happens. And then, as you know, you've got to fill out wads of paperwork as well, so we just try and avoid it. Get rid of the annual performance review. This kind of approach is much more effective. Now, on the surface, it's feeling like more meetings, and yes it is, but I can guarantee you that you will get a better result as a result. So this is what it looks like. You've got a daily huddle, you've got a weekly meeting, and you've got a monthly meeting. Many of you probably have those things in place today. These are team-based interactions designed to create a culture of accountability. Very distinct purpose, very distinct agenda. I'm going to share with you what that looks like in a moment. And then you've got 2 one-on-one forums. You've got this concept of a monthly check-in, where I'm going to check in with you one-on-one and see how you're going. And then I've got the concept of a quarterly catch-up, and that's going to replace the annual performance review, but without the ratings and without the paperwork, and a much more meaningful conversation. So number one, note the language. It's not called a performance appraisal or a performance review, because that sounds really, really scary. It's a check-in or it's a catch-up. So we're trying to create a culture here where psychologically we're really safe and we're comfortable talking about what's not working and we're comfortable asking for help. And this is what we're trying to get out of this. So let me talk about this daily huddle for a moment. But before I go there, there's one more tool that you may find really, really useful in this context. And it's a really simple thing. It's called a 30-day plan. Now, in an environment where we need to be much more nimble and much more agile, imagine this. Imagine your leadership team comes together every 30 days and each of you has a 30-day plan to discuss with the other members of the leadership team. And on your 30-day plan, you're going to note and share with the team the 1 to 3 things that you commit to do in the next 30 days, aligned with the strategy, aligned to the wildly important goal for the business, so not what's in the whirlwind, but the thing that needs to rise to the top, that is non-negotiable that you will deliver on. And you come to the team and you share that. And within that meeting, what you're going to do is you're going to debate and challenge with each other and have a really healthy level of conflict, because at the end of that meeting, the objective is not only am I comfortable with my 30-day goals, but I'm comfortable with everybody else's in my team. And we're all aligned, we're all going in the same direction, we all know our role, we are now set up to be a high-performance team. Now, you can see there's some other elements of this that I won't talk through in this session. They're pretty intuitive, but that's the concept. That becomes part of the purpose of the monthly meeting. Now, not surprisingly, as soon as you take some of these big goals that you can't get traction on and break them down into small deliverables, we get progress. There's 2 principles that underpin creating this culture of accountability, and they're both related to transparency. Number 1, within the team environment, there is full transparency around what each of us are working on and what our goals are. It's not a conversation just with you and your manager. It is fully transparent, and we're going to talk about it all the time. And the second element of transparency is this. Within the team environment, there's full transparency regarding how I'm going against my goals. It's not a one-on-one conversation with my manager and nobody gets to hear about it. We talk about it as a team. Now, this isn't done in a punitive way, it's done in a really supportive way, because now we've created a forum where we can say, I'm working towards this and I need your help. I'm stuck. I'm a bit perplexed about this. Can we talk about this as a team? This is where we get the high level of support within organisations that really, really makes the difference. So let's now talk about these agendas. And I'm just going to focus on the first 2 for today, the daily stand-up and the weekly meeting. Hands up, who's doing a daily stand-up of some kind within their business? A number of you are, okay. So the key thing here is to think about the agenda. And this agenda has been very specifically designed based on a whole lot of research. So the concept here is it's a 15-minute meeting every single morning at a time that suits everybody. In my business, I do it at 8:10 every morning, Sydney time, which for the poor people in Brisbane is 7:10 in the morning when daylight savings kicks in, but that's the time we agreed. We do it via Zoom, we see each other's faces, we talk for no more than 2 minutes each. If we can't show up, we actually use WhatsApp and we send each other the response to these questions. So we engage with this every day. And my other rule is this, just show up. I don't care if you're walking down the street, if you're walking the dog, if you've got the kids in the backyard, if you're still in your pajamas or you're eating your breakfast, just show up. And that's how we do show up. And it's a whole lot of fun. So agenda item number 1. What's my good news or my gratitude statement for the day? Now, why would you start your day with a good news or a gratitude statement? For the following reason. The positive psychology research will tell us if you start your day with an expression of gratitude or good news, and it can be personal or it can be work related, it sets your mindset for not only the rest of the day, but for quite a few days. You're more open to possibilities, you're more likely to collaborate, you've got an optimistic out view on the world. That's a pretty good way to start your day, I reckon, versus dragging yourself out of bed, still worried about what happened yesterday, or pissed off at somebody, or whatever might be going through your head. The second thing is, when you talk to teams who do this regularly, what they'll share with you is this: I know my team members better than I have ever known them before. Even people that have worked together for 10 years, you start to really understand each other. And this is so powerful when we talk about vulnerability and trust and being able to support each other, which is what we're leading towards. And the third thing that's so critical is, as an organisation, one of the biggest drivers of motivation is people feeling valued and appreciated. By giving people the chance to just share makes them feel valued and appreciated. But the second thing is, as a leader, you can actually role model really powerful behaviour. So your good news or gratitude statement may be something that someone else has done in the team. And if you start to call that out regularly, not surprisingly, other people will start to mimic that behaviour. So now you've got a culture where people are recognising each other and making them feel valued and appreciated. Fantastic. Now we've got the foundation for accountability and high performance. The second agenda item, what's my focus for today? A deliberate thought process at the start of the day to say, what's the one thing I'm going to do today that matters? Not surprisingly, it happens because we're sharing it with the team and we're consciously thinking about it. We go to our rocks, we don't go to our gravel and the sand. What's my critical metric? This is linking my focus for today to what's important for the business. My focus for today is to call our biggest customer and understand their strategy. My critical metric, customer retention. It's telling me that what I'm doing matters and it provides meaning to my work. What do I need help with? This gets rid of all the excuses. No longer am I going to sit there going, well, you know, I emailed Susie 3 days ago and I'm still waiting for her to get back to me, so I'm just sitting here waiting. Susie, I emailed you yesterday. If you wouldn't mind responding because I need to get that report out to the customer. Yep, no worries, Trudy, onto it. And guess what? Stuff happens. And what starts to happen then is we feel comfortable asking for help because it's on the agenda. It changes the culture significantly. So if there's only one thing you take out of today, I'd recommend considering this, because I reckon I hear from a CEO who's been to one of these sessions probably once a week saying, Trudy, this has been a game changer for me, an absolute game changer. So have a think about it. On the weekly agenda, there's one thing to highlight for you there. How am I progressing on my 30-day plan? No longer are we going to scramble in 2 days before the end of the month. We've got this regular cadence of asking for help and making sure we're progressing. So this is the concept of the accountability cadence. Now there's one more element to this just to share with you very quickly, which is the importance within this cadence of making sure your team members and yourself know how to have constructive accountability conversations. And what tends to happen is this. We play in this space of being too subtle. So this is a model from a book by the name of Radical Candor. The author is Kim Scott. She's a former Google executive. If you just Google it, you'll see that there's TED Talks, you'll see that there's YouTube videos. But what she'll talk about is when we give feedback, we usually do one of two things. We're either really direct, we hit people straight between the eyes with it, or we're indirect, which means we beat around the bush and we never really get the message across. Or we're really, really concerned about how they're going to respond, and subsequently we tend to be indirect because, oh my goodness, they might have a reaction. Or we don't care at all and we just slam them. Now, when I ask leaders to explore this and reflect on themselves, not surprisingly, most leaders will acknowledge that they play in this space most of the time. But what happens when we play in that space is people don't actually hear us. And we have the conversation over and over and over again, and we get really frustrated. And when we get frustrated enough, what happens? Bang, straight into the too harsh category, and then we've got an issue. And in fact, most of the bullying and harassment claims that go through Fair Work Australia are because of these conversations. They become too harsh. So we need to teach people how to have these conversations. So let me share with you a really simple model for doing this, and let me role play it for you. I'll role play it with myself, so none of you need to get nervous about that. All right. As soon as you say role play, everybody just tenses up. So how do we be direct? There's a really simple model, SBI. It stands for Situation, Behaviour, Impact. Imagine you are sitting in a meeting with one of your partners or fellow directors and you've got an issue with them because they're not stepping up. Can anybody relate to that? I heard it quite a bit in the last week. Okay. It might go a little bit like this. John, in the meeting this morning, when we were talking about our goals and where we're going as an organisation, what I observed is that you didn't appear to be in agreement. Specifically, you had your arms crossed, your body language was terrible, and you just shut down the conversation with your aggressive tone of voice. The impact of that was that the entire meeting shut down. In fact, we weren't able to get any other great ideas from anybody because everybody was feeling quite tense as a result of your behaviour. I've just had a really direct conversation with John. However, I need to make sure he doesn't get defensive. So what I've got to wrap into that is a level of care so I can play in that radical candor space. And this is the way I do it. I'm going to lean into that conversation from a point of care and concern because I'm going to have it not long after it happened, not a year after it happened in the annual performance review, right? I'm having it an hour after that happened. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to be curious and ask questions in a very gentle way. So it might sound a little bit like this. John, in the meeting this morning when we were talking about our goals for the future, it was evident to me that you weren't on board with our future direction, specifically your body language, the crossed arms, and the tone of voice, specifically when you yelled at Mary and told her that that was the most stupid idea you'd ever heard. The impact of that was it really shut down the conversation in the room, and we weren't able to have a really constructive conversation around how we could go forward. So I wanted to reach out to you and just check in to see how you're feeling. How you feeling, mate? What's going on? That's the conversation I need to have. And before I enable John to respond, I'm going to lean in to say, I want to check in on you and how you're doing. Let's have a chat about how you're feeling. Now, this is one of the most powerful things you can train your people how to do. Quick real story, talking to an executive last week. She had one of her team members present to the executive team on an initiative that they were working on. The CEO was in the room, and about 10 minutes in the conversation, he's like, nah, stop. This is all wrong. We can't go forward with this. You guys have missed the mark. I want you to go back and rework this whole proposal, and we're going to come back in 2 weeks' time and give it another go. That was his response. But this is what happened. And this is me having the conversation with the other executive in the room. She's like, oh my goodness, Trudy, my team member who presented, you can imagine how she's feeling right now. What she's saying to me is, I'm never going to do that ever again. She's been in tears for the last 24 hours. I've got collateral damage I'm now dealing with. My response to her, what are you going to do about it? I can't talk to the CEO. He and I clash. He's intimidating. He's awful. I can't have this conversation. It's like, okay, well, you've got two choices here. You have the conversation and you try to change it, or you don't and you expect the same is going to continue. So I coached her through this model. She's very brave. The next day she had the conversation. I said, I'm going to call you at the end of tomorrow and we're going to talk about how it went. And this is what happened. Let me just use John again. John, in the meeting yesterday, when my team member presented our strategy, it's obvious that we were on the right track. In response to how you communicated that, however, Belinda is now really upset. Specifically, she's lost all her confidence. She's actually been in tears for the last 24 hours. And she's sworn that she's never going to do that again. I wanted to have a chat to you to see how we can make sure in these situations moving forward that we can really boost the confidence of our high potential staff that we're putting in these situations. What are your thoughts on this? Let's have a chat. And then she held her breath. Thought, oh my God, what's going to happen? This is what happened. 30 seconds of silence. It was mulling over in his head. And this is what he said. He said, thank you so much for sharing that with me. You know what? Sometimes I'm not aware of the impact of my behaviour. I need to get results. I need to get this right. I'm under a lot of stress at the moment. And you know what? I can't believe that that's the impact I've had on Bulimba. It's the last thing that I want to happen. Thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. And then he went on to say this. He said, could I set up a bit of an arrangement with you? Can we work out a bit of a secret signal? So in future in meetings, if I start to go off track, you can just give me the subtle signal so I know just to pull it back a bit. She was absolutely blown away. But this is what happens if the conversations are done well. Vulnerability comes out and we take relationships to another level. So with all of that, lots and lots of information today. Here's the key takeaways. Number one, if we want a culture of accountability, it starts with us defining what greatness looks like at an organisational level. From there, we've got the opportunity to actually redefine the ways of working and specifically to ask ourselves, what does great look like for me and for my team? And that's a combination of both behaviours as well as what those big rocks are. From there, we've got the concept of an accountability cadence. And this is the repeated pattern so that we can make accountability just be part of the conversation with lots of transparency. And finally, to wrap around that, we need to train our leaders how to actually have these conversations. If you're interested in that latter bit, I've got a public program that starts in 2 weeks, an hour a week for 6 weeks, lots of video content, lots of engaging with other businesses to share stories. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I can let you know more about that. With that, there is a link up there if you would like to download a copy of the presentation, so I'll leave that up there. Feel free to take a photo or write it down. But other than that, thank you very much. And Richard, let me hand back to you.
All right, are there any questions? I'm sure Donovan always starts with a question here. Everybody misses the opportunity. Donovan? Oh, sorry. Ladies first, my apologies.
Thank you. I completely understand your point of view of not having a job description, but how do you hire people and put something on seat if you don't have a job description?
Yes, very, very good question. And I'm a little bit tongue-in-cheek in that, right? So often for compliance reasons or for some of those reasons, you need to understand the scope of the role and you need to put a tick in that box. So yes, have your job description for those purposes. However, if we're looking at something really meaningful that's going to drive high performance, my recommendation is get something in place that's much more agile and much more relevant to what the organisation needs. Yeah, good reflection. Thank you. Any other questions?
Donovan?
Since I have your permission to speak, first of all, I was blown away by that, Trudy. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
There's so much content there, and I hadn't even, in deep thought, time and time again. It seems to me, though, that do we have to be in COVID-19 land to apply these principles? Because this is a dynamic, continuous improvement approach that you've taken.
Yeah.
Does it have to be, in these dark times to apply what you're talking about?
Absolutely not, and you're spot on. So what I'm talking about now, this is what the best organisations do around the world. I think for many organisations, COVID has been a really nice instigator to ask ourselves what can we do differently and to reimagine. So never let a good crisis go to waste, right? If this has instigated it for you, then that's good. Thank you. Yes?
I agree, it was a fantastic presentation and also links in really closely with our scaling up book. It's actually quite similar to how we follow Bernard on.
Yes.
The cadences and the quality reviews, so that rocks all the priorities and works very nicely
Yeah.
what we'd like to do here at Courage. My question is also around COVID, and you mentioned that a lot of leaders have lost their mojo and so on. I'm really seeing that as well.
Yeah.
Is there any a couple of quick tips you can give, because we are mostly Zooming now and team members in Melbourne are feeling quite down, and these are all great ways forward and quite that we should use anyway. But
Yeah.
is there anything just of the moment because it is a marathon now?
Yeah, really, really great question. So there's a few things here. I think there's the personal care element. So setting yourself some goals from a personal care perspective. And, you know, we all know what we need to do. It's exercise, it's sleep, it's you know, all of those good things. Just pick one thing. Pick one thing and commit to it, and you'll see that it will start to make a difference. One of the most powerful things I've seen is just committing to do a walking meeting once a day. So get outside in the fresh air and have your meeting while you're walking. That can be a mental recharge for you. So there's the wellbeing resilience side, but from a work perspective, if I take the concepts that I was talking about today, think about this. Number one, what motivates you? What are your strengths and what motivates you? Tie that into your great work and make a deliberate effort to start to get rid of some of the things that don't motivate you because you're caught up in this whirlwind. So for me personally, and I've been going through this, I'm just as human as the rest of you, I found that I've had to pull up my sleeves and get right into the core of the business operationally again. And I went through a period going, you know what, I can't even see the end to this. I've had to make staff redundant. I'm working 80 hours a week. When's this going to end? And it was a week ago that I actually sat down with my team and I said, stop. We've just got to stop. We need to regain our weekends. We need to regain some sanity. What are we going to do differently? And we pulled out that exercise, good, great, poor, missing, and straight away it's given us all permission to start doing some things differently, and now I can see a path through it. So that's one of the most powerful things. And the other thing, if I just reflect back again, pull out that wildly important goal that's meaningful to you, that you can connect with, and make that your focus. Because we love to work towards goals. And what I'm finding with a lot of leaders at the moment is, I don't have time to think about that. I've just got my sleeves rolled up. I'm in the operations. Pick that one business goal that's going to be the revolutionary change and put all your energy into that, because that will lift your motivation. Thank you.
Last question. Any last question? All good? Good. Ladies and gentlemen, Trudy MacDonald.
Thanks, everyone.
I've got all of Trudy's contact details, or sorry, we have all of contact of Trudy's details. So if there's anybody that needs to contact her, we're certainly happy to pass on those details without any further ado, and certainly make some of the stuff available to you for review. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Trudy MacDonald.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I've got some business cards over here as well, if anybody wants them. Thank you.
Cheers. All right, hot topic, ladies and gentlemen. The next key speaker for today is an area that I think we've been getting lots of feedback from as well, as to where we all stand as private employers in this whole employment world at the moment. And our next speaker, I think, has all the qualifications to give us that advice. Rachel has over 23 years' experience on acting on behalf of SMEs, as well as larger, well-known corporations, state government regulators, local government entities and self-insurers. Rachel acted as a prosecutor for WorkCover New South Wales, now Safe Work New South Wales, the New South Wales Food Authority and the Fair Work Ombudsman for a combined period of some 15 years. Rachel is experienced in all aspects of workplace laws and has a strong background in advising public and private sector employers. She's regularly invited to speak at industry conferences in relation to employment, work health and safety and risk management. Big key takeaways: how to manage the staff during the pandemic, changes to employment law landscape including modern awards, pandemic leave and redundancies, COVID-19 testing, face masks, safe plans and OH&S. Ladies and gentlemen, Rachel Sutton.